Sir, in regard to the examination of the water powers of your colony, having in view electric transmission of energy, I beg to make the following preliminary report. We examined the Waikato watershed, visiting the lakes Taupo and Roto'ara. In this region, which is quite unusual in many ways, immense quantities of power can be developed, and although somewhat distant from the centers of industry, it will someday prove of wonderful value to the colony. The vision of immense quantities of water power, which would someday prove of wonderful value to the colony, was to become a reality 70 years after the prediction was made in 1903. The year 1954 saw the New Zealand government engage engineering consultants Sir Alexander Gibb and Partners of London to investigate the possibility of producing more power from the Waikato River drainage system. Work soon began on a series of dams and power stations on the upper Waikato River. At the same time, investigations began on what was to become known as the Tongariro Power Development. The goal of this development was to capture water coming off the mountains of the Central Plateau. This was to be done by a complex system of river and stream diversions, tunnels and canals, lakes and power stations, and a catchment of more than 1,000 square miles. As a technical proposition, the Tongariro Power Project was to be the finishing touch, the completion of harnessing the Waikato drainage system for hydroelectric purposes. Construction on the Tongariro Power Project began on September 4, 1964. Once the project construction phase began, Turangi was inundated with a large workforce. At its peak, the Tongariro Power Development employed over 2,100 men. A lot of these men had come up the Waikato, working on the many power projects started after World War II. They would become known as Ngāti Hydro. The arrival of a large group of Italian tunnelers added an international flair to the community. Tunneling was to be a challenging aspect of the project and often fraught with danger. For 20 years, this workforce labored to bring one of the biggest civil engineering projects in New Zealand's history to completion. The Tongariro Power Development has been producing electricity for more than 35 years. For most, the construction phase is largely forgotten. However, what I hope that isn't forgotten is the memory of the men and their pride of association with the project. After all, it was these men who built this engineering legacy. I'm going to tell you the story of one such man, a Scottish immigrant, and the only person who worked from the beginning to the end on the Tongariro Power Development.
Yes, Mr. Director, sir. Lead on. What do we have? This is called the Wanganui Pipe Bridge. And it's about, from memory, it's 3.5 meters in diameter, and it's about 100 meters long.
Kerry Scott, a civil engineer originally from Elgin, Scotland, arrived in Turangi in 1957. His employer at the time was the London-based consulting company, Sir Alexander Gibb and Partners. Kerry was being assigned to the investigation team, assessing the viability of the Tongariro Power Development. For the next 5 years, Kerry surveyed nearly 1,000 square miles of the Central Plateau watershed, assessing water flow and determining the critical levels. As a result of these investigations, Gibb and Partners submitted their report to the government with the recommendation that the development proceed.
Quite a structure, isn't it? Eh? Actually, getting it into place was a bit of a challenge.
When the New Zealand government gave the power project its final approval, Kerry knew he wanted to be part of it. The complexity and size of the civil engineering works was exactly what he was looking for. The project for Kerry was to become a life's achievement. He progressed up the management ladder to the overall project construction engineer. He was a field man at heart. He took a great deal of interest in all the construction projects. He gave me a tour of some of these structures. I could tell he knew them like the back of his hand. I could see professional pride in his work, but no professional arrogance.
The Te Whaiau Canal, hence into Lake Otamanakau, and down the Wairohu Canal and into Rotaira.
The construction days must have been quite something.
Oh well, it was all happening here. There was 10,000 people living in Turangi. There were 3 primary schools, a high school, a new maternity hospital, and there was something like 84 clubs in the town. And there was a very good community spirit. Hang on, are you doing something? I've got something to tell you.
The retired engineer was giving me an earful on the Whanganui Pipe Bridge, but I was dying to hear his story of how his life in Turangi began.
That's the crew in Project Office, or Bullshit Castle as it was known as. And there I am, with a toy of hell.
Kerry took me back in time to a cold winter's day in London in 1957. His employer, Sir Alexander Gibb and Partners, the internationally renowned consulting engineering firm, was about to make a decision that would send Kerry to the other side of the world.
January '57, I got called up to the director's room, which was rather unusual, I thought. It sounded as though I was going to get the boot. And the chief director happened to be a Scotsman. And he said, "Oh, Scott, how would you like to go to New Zealand?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that sounds all right." Sort of business. So that was that. And in February I was on a DC-6B en route to New Zealand.
Kerry took up residence at the Sir Alexander Gibb camp on the edge of scrub, which would eventually be developed into the town of Turangi.
And we arrived at the camp, which was there was a row of dog boxes, 10 by 8 huts, and a lounge come kitchen all in one build. Not long afterwards, I was in bed one night, and I could feel the hut rocking a bit, and it was a horse. It was rubbing itself on the side of the hut. So I got out and said, "Grr!" and it bolted away, and it rushed over a sheet of corrugated iron. So there was this clunk, clunk, clunk. So that was my introduction.
That was your introduction to New Zealand.
To Turangi, yeah.
Sir Alexander Gibb had sent Kerry to Turangi as an investigations engineer. The proposed power scheme was very complex and needed considerable exploration to ensure its viability. For the most part, in the beginning, it was a case of just getting out to know the countryside, because the scheme covered 1,000 square miles. One of Kerry's early responsibilities included core drilling, to find out what was down below the surface to ensure proper support for the proposed structures. He was also involved with gauging the rivers to see how much water was there, water being the necessary key for hydropower.
we needed to find out how much fuel there was there. In other words, how much water. So one of the jobs I did in the early days was measure the river. We particularly had to try and get flood flows. So flood flows were a bit of a problem because it's not everywhere that you can get. I know there's a photograph somewhere. Just wait.
That's right. Yep, keep going. That's good.
Here we go. There's the type of instruments, you see, that we used. Now this was a cableway we put up in 1959, because in February '58, the big flood took out all our gauging stations. You know, it was completely changed.
So you're measuring liver flows.
That's right.
Was the results optimistic for the project?
Yes, it confirmed what the Ministry of Works had guesstimated, I guess. Yeah. All the engineers and surveyors on the crew come from overseas. Some had come from Britain, some had come from Africa. Mainly the surveyors had come from Africa. Chainmen we recruited locally, so they were all local people, and you get to know them pretty well. Now, we've got a photograph here of that was some of the crew. It wasn't them all. These were all chainmen. And of course what they do is they cut the survey lines because there was a lot of tea tree and scrub and all sorts of things that you had to fight your way through. The surveyors needed clear line of sight, so they would cut the lines, and then they would hold up the staffs, the survey staff, so that the surveyors could do their thing. This was their bus, and in the back they had this couch which they sat on. And if you weren't the first three into the bus, then you didn't get a seat.
Much of Kerry's early years were spent out in the field with his chainman crew. Time has taken its toll on the original crew. Only Stuart Carroll and Eddie Kumaroa are still alive today. Getting together with Stuart was a great opportunity to talk about the time they shared in the field, exploring and surveying.
It's good to meet up with you again, Stuart. But how did you get into Turangi in the first place? Because you weren't here originally. How did you get onto our books and become a chainman?
Jim Rafferty, I think, because I used to run into Jim Rafferty every now and again, and it started off actually we were talking about the rugby now.
There were the many forays together, beating their way through the scrub and bush, surveying roads and locations for the proposed power project.
I was still staying up on the farm a bit, and then that's how I said, I'll see if I can get you a job. Well, it was about 2 days after.
Also part of their fond memories were the gatherings they had at the local pub, where stories were told and the odd colleague receiving a roasting.
This fella here at the end, Joe Cody, or Joe Kaki, he was the lead and all that.
All in all, I sense a huge amount of respect amongst these men, and a genuine pride for the work they achieved.
He'd fought his way through all the scrub, which was all the scrub where the shopping centre was and all that sort of stuff.
All scrub along here.
Yeah, oh God, he was a card.
Yeah.
Kerry was initially contracted with Sir Alexander Gibb for a period of 1 year. However, developments moved quite quickly during 1957, and the government provided additional funding to the Gibb team to carry on their investigations. Gibb would make Kerry a unique offer, which was to have a major impact on his life.
So the money was available, and they said to me, "Oh, well, we'd like you to stay on a bit longer. How about staying for 3 years?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I don't mind. And, yeah, I'm enjoying it here. It was good." And they said, you don't have any, I can't remember how they put it, but I think it wasn't encumbrances, but it was something like that. And I said, well, yeah, there's a girl I'm engaged to. She I suppose, won't wait forever. Oh, I think she would actually. And they said, oh, okay, well, we'll see what we can do. And they come back and said, right, we'll send her out. You can get married in New Zealand. What do you think of that? And I said, yeah, fair enough, okay.
Well, I thought that was very exciting. I mean, not everybody gets to fly all the way to New Zealand to get married, do they? I remember wondering how on earth we were going to find a church and a minister, but Kerry had worked all that out. The night before the wedding, I stayed at the Wairaki Hotel, which is not like what it is now, and I was awake all night because the steam bores roared all night. It was a tremendous noise, and I was up at about 5:30 in the morning because I couldn't cope any longer. Kerry invited various people, you know, from Sir Alexander well, I suppose all the staff from Sir Alexander Giving Partner came, and all the drilling contractors. But really the only person I knew was Kerry, which I suppose was lucky. I knew him.
In 1962, GIB had finished their report and had duly handed it over to the Ministry of Works and the government. And so Margaret and I packed up our bags and went back to Britain.
We went home by ship. By this time we had 3 small children under the age of 5.
I went into the GIB headquarters in London, in Queen Anne's Lodge, and saw the partners and said, look, I'm back. And they said, oh yeah, right. Well, we haven't actually looked out a job for you yet, but it'll probably be in our London office. So you can imagine my face dropped quite dramatically. I mean, after being 5-6 years of New Zealand and in the bush, and out in a tussock, what do you expect?
And we had 3 little Kiwis who were used to bare feet and sort of, I think our parents were slightly scandalised because we were told off, either my mother or Kerry's, I can't remember which, that we'd been out and they had bare feet. And all the neighbours would think we were too poor to buy shoes.
Margaret and I decided that this wasn't us.
Where we really wanted to be was New Zealand.
Let's go back to New Zealand. To hell with this place. So we did.
Kerry, Margaret, and their 3 children had returned to New Zealand in 1962, anticipating that the power project was soon to be approved. Kerry knew there would be ample civil engineering opportunities on this huge project. September 4th, 1964, the government declared that construction would begin immediately on the Tongariro Power Project. Turangi was turned into a hub of activity as construction crews began building a town to house the rapidly arriving workforce. Kerry got a sought-after engineering position with the Ministry of Works. He had 5 years investigating the project. Now he was going to turn his engineering expertise into building it. Initially, the Ministry of Works put Kerry to work in the hydrology department based in Lower Hutt, but he really wanted fieldwork on the Tongariro project. So, with the first opportunity, he transferred to Turangi.
Immediately before we came back to Turangi, we were at Aratiatia for a few months while they developed a bit of the housing. And I remember Kerry coming home to me and saying, I I saw a house going through Earthquake Gully, and it's just had its eaves taken off because it was too wide. And we discovered, to our horror, that was our house. There were lots of bare areas, and there were all these huge machines thundering up and down, flattening things out. And every day you had to go around all the windowsills, and you got, about an inch of pumice dust on everything. There were a lot of houses came in, and every day there was a new set, and you could see the houses sort of appearing. But it was quite exciting.
And that's part of it.
There was more to returning to New Zealand and work opportunity. Kerry and Margaret had grown attached to the community and the special environment around Turangi.
Do you like this? One of the reasons that you wanted to come back and live here full time, you and Margaret?
Yes, I guess so, yeah. It was a lot freer country. We didn't have 47 million charging around in much the same place. We had a slightly less than 2 million, I think. So, we had plenty of space, plenty of fresh air. What more could you ask for?
Yeah, it is true.
Yeah.
With the move to Turangi, Kerry was now back in familiar territory. His new employer, the Ministry of Works, was to take advantage of his experience and knowledge gained from his investigation days with Sir Alexander Gibb. They made Kerry their investigations engineer. He was the perfect fit for the job.
Yep.
It's like a drilling rig.
That's right.
What's the scoop on this?
With the construction about to start on the Whanganui River Dam, one of the proposed concrete structures, it was critical to know what was beneath the surface. Kerry went back to investigation drilling to ensure the structure was viable.
Well, we were drilling, looking for rock. We drilled a series of holes on either side, and we drilled holes down in the bottom to make sure there was enough rock down there to support the toe of the concrete dam, because that's where the pressure comes. Barry Campbell was up there. He decided to put a shaft down beside one of our boreholes, and he put a shaft down about 4 feet away from our borehole. And lo and behold, hello, no rock. Nature played a nasty trick on us. We thought there was a dam site there, and there wasn't. And it wasn't until they started the excavation of the dam site that we found, lo and behold, we haven't got a dam site here. So this is why this structure is here where it is, rather than further downstream. So we still get this water diverted through pipelines and into Lake Otamanakau, and then hence down the Wairahoo Canal to Roto'aira. They then advertised the positions of resident engineers, and there was about 5 of them advertised all at the same time. And I got resident engineer Malfonger, which was fair enough. See, the other people all came from jobs that they had been on for a while, and they'd been in Ministry of Works for quite a while, whereas at that stage of the game I only had 2 years of experience in Ministry of Works. And I suppose they looked at me a bit sideways and said, well, what does he know? What does he know in the field? So I suppose I had to prove myself a bit.
Kerry was promoted from investigations to Mofanga resident engineer in 1966. Due to the government restrictions on funding, there were delays getting the Mofanga Dam underway. Meanwhile, the government had decided to tender out the construction of the Whanganui, Mofongo, and Tokono tunnels to private contractors. Because of his investigation experience and intimate knowledge of the geology of the area, the Ministry of Works selected Kerry to be the facilitator for this tunnel tendering process. This was a little frustrating for Kerry, as he had a hankering for real engineering work. 3 years later, in 1969, there was to be an about-turn in Kerry's responsibilities when he was promoted to PO2 resident engineer. The PO2 project was multifaceted and was all go. There was the construction of a dam and intake structure, a 5-mile tunnel, a 10-mile canal, several road bridges, and lots of earthworks. There would be real civil engineering work ahead for Kerry, and numerous challenges.
When I got this position of resident engineer PO2, this really gave me plenty of engineering work, exactly what I wanted. It was great to be out in the field and getting your boots dirty and seeing things being built. We were all motivated to get on with it. We could see that the work was getting on fairly well, and morale was high.
Work was already progressing on the dam on the PO2 stream, as well as the dam and intake structure on the Tongariro River. The PO2 dam was to block the stream. Its channel was to be widened and deepened to reverse its flow back into Lake Rota'ara. The Rangipo Dam on the Tongariro River would capture the water from the eastern diversion and direct it through a tunnel to a proposed power station at Rangipo. After passing through the power station, a concrete intake structure would divert the water by way of another tunnel to the PO2 Aqueduct Canal and eventually flow into Lake Rota'ara. Since his early civil engineering days in Scotland, Kerry has always had an affinity for the underground work, tunneling. He had ample opportunity for this kind of work at PO2.
The PO2 tunnel was always my favourite part of this particular job, and it went very well indeed. We had a great team of men. There were men who had been tunnelling most of their lives, I guess. The rock was ignibrite, and we were able to drill it with cold drills rather than the conventional rock hammers. That speeded up the process quite a bit. We mucked it out with what is known as a Conway mucker, which is it's a throw-over mucker, and we had 2 of them, and each of the 2 came from the Manapuri project, which was nearly finished by then. That project gave me a lot of satisfaction.
What also gave Kerry a great sense of satisfaction was his association with the men working under him on many of the construction projects. Having had first-hand experience, he knew a lot of the work was hard and physical. Kerry respected their men for their efforts, and this respect was returned and in many cases turned into firm friendships. Paul Tapra, one of his shift bosses, is one such person. Paul, like Kerry, is retired and lives around the corner in Turangi. They still get together, and often on these occasions, the conversation slips back to the construction days.
Once the invert slabs were poured, Paul and his gang here came along and they did the slip form of the sides. And on a cold winter's morning, they managed to do 1 a day, and that was the first slip they ever made. But they very rapidly learned what the routine was, and eventually they got up to 7 slips a day, which was very good progress indeed. Paul, now, how did you manage to get up to 7 a day?
We learned a system that made it easier for us, but also it was faster. And so we got to the stage where we did 7 slipforms a day, which was a good record.
Oh yeah, very good.
And
that was a very good record.
And everybody was quite happy with that.
Paul, when you get up to 7 slips a day, what motivated you to do the 7? Why didn't you just do 3 or 4 and be done with it?
Because of the engineer who couldn't believe that we had done 5 in a day. And he said to me, he says, do 7 and I'll shut you. I said, you're on. And within a short period of time, take 2 weeks, I went up to him and I said to him, hey, we've done 7 bays. No, you haven't. I said, go and have a look. So he did. And he says, okay, wash out. And he shouted the whole gang, which was fantastic.
Paul, why is it that so many of us have decided to retire in Turangi? In fact, a lot of people have come back to Turangi to retire.
The bond that was set when we worked together, not only on our particular job, but overall with the Ministry of Works, everybody bonded together during our working times and also in our leisure times. Especially the women folk felt the bondship was here in Turangi. And I'm speaking for Māoris and Pākehās as well.
In 1971, Kerry Scott was promoted to Project Construction Engineer. This made him number 2 in the project management hierarchy. He moved into the management offices in Turangi, to what was affectionately known as Bullshit Castle. Kerry became a little more desk-bound, but it was hard for him to resist an almost daily field trip to keep an eye on progress. In the early 1970s, both the Tucano Tunnel and Power Station were nearing completion. During this construction period, Kerry would develop a strong working relationship with a young civil engineer, Gary Gay, who was sent to Turangi from the design office in Wellington. Gary the boss and Gary, the new boy on the block, perhaps because of their civil engineering backgrounds, hit it off and worked well together.
Gary, that was the penstock track, and getting the actual strakes of penstocks into position was your first problem that you came on when you came to Tucano. I can't remember all the details, but there was all sorts of switches and things. Can you tell me what the hell did you do?
Yes, I was working in the power design office in Wellington back in 1966, and I was offered a job here at Tucano, and I jumped at that, of course, because I'd been designing some of these structures, and now was an opportunity for me to get in there and be part of the construction of them. So I came up to Turangi, and I remember coming down here to Tucano, and the boss at the time, he got out some sort of layout drawings. He said, right, here's the penstocks. You sort out a way of getting those penstocks down the hill. So here I am, a 27-year-old, straight out of an office, and I get this very daunting task. Over a period of 2 or 3 months, I put forward a proposal to make up the penstocks into as large sections as we could in Turangi, because obviously you didn't want to be doing difficult work on the penstock slope if you could avoid it. So bigger chunks as we could get, and we transported them down from Turangi to Tucano here on a road that was specially built, because the weights were such that we couldn't put these things on the main highway. And then we took them up to the top of the slope, and we had a couple of trolleys under each section, and we slowly railed them down using a winch and a cable into their final position, and then we put them on steel legs and sat them there.
When you were lowering them down, did you have any moments of sheer terror or excitement?
We sure did. The very first section we brought down, I was standing downstream of the section, and the section came over anchor block 2, which is the one immediately above the powerhouse. And as it came over the anchor block, I could see a gas bottle had been left inside the penstock and it hadn't been tied down properly. And as it came over onto the steeper grade, this gas bottle started to slide out. And me and the chap that were with me, we both ducked down. The gas bottle went flying over the top of us, went end over end down into the powerhouse. And as it did, the nozzle broke off the top and it was flying around like a balloon.
Gary, I remember coming down here and looking at the excavation, which was immediately downstream of the powerhouse now. The scoopers were working in clouds of steam. It was pretty warm down here. And then down here somewhere, we got a geyser, didn't we?
We did.
And that...
That was one of our investigation holes.
Was it?
Yeah, we're doing some investigations.
Okay.
And the rods came flying back up the hole, and we got.
It was all under pressure. There wasn't a reason why.
We had quite a nasty little accident there with that hot water. We had a chap, Alistair Gilby, who was a mechanical guy. Yeah. We had a pumping sump, you may recall, which is tucked in by the powerhouse, and we were pumping very hot water. Alistair was down there doing some work on them one day and he slipped. He had gumboots on and he slipped into the hot water and the hot water went into his gumboots and they scalded one of his legs rather bad.
The Ministry of Works pushed ahead, dredging the tail race, installing the penstocks, and completing the Tucano Power Station. Kerry watched the progress with a sense of satisfaction and shared the jubilation when on September 1st, 1972, Downer's construction blasted the hole through of the Tucano Tunnel. Two of the 4 generators in the Tucano Power Station were commissioned in July of 1973. The nation was now receiving the first electric power from the Tongariro Power Development. This was indeed a proud milestone. Although there was a great sense of achievement with the commissioning of the Tucano Power Station, the drought of 1973 created some urgency for the government to push ahead with the final stage of the Tongariro Power Development. While work on the dams, tunnels, and canals of the Eastern Diversion were under construction, what was needed to generate more electricity was the approval of a power station at Rangipo. Rangipo was finally approved in November of 1973, but it was not until 1983 before the power station was opened. Rangipo was to be the second underground power station in New Zealand after Manapuri. It was designed and constructed by the Ministry of Works. Rangipo was the final stage of the project that the young Scottish civil engineer first investigated 15 years earlier. Kerry relished this new construction challenge. He was again to be teamed up with Gary Gay. Gary had proven his engineering capabilities at Tucano and was promoted to Rangipo resident engineer. The two settled into what would become a 10-year challenging and extremely rewarding project.
Down there, that's Rangipo North. That's in the powerhouse thing. They're putting in the.
This part of the development had aroused the anger of the Tongariro and Lake Taupo Anglers Club and forced the Wildlife Branch of Internal Affairs to assess the potential harm of reduced river flows on the trout fishery. This necessitated further environmental investigations.
Well, Rangipo, as I recall, was the first job in which we had to prepare an environmental impact report. This was something quite new. Thank God we didn't have the Resource Management Act then, but even so, there were quite stringent requirements placed on us because we were working within the Kaimana Forest Park, that we kept that construction footprint to the bare minimum. And I think we achieved that. But generally speaking, everything in the complex is underground. It was a very big excavation. In fact, we took 50,000 cubic metres of material out of this chamber, The method we used was drill and blast, which is a process whereby you drill holes into the rock, you load the rock with explosives, gelignite, your rock breaks up, and then that rock is loaded onto transportation and taken out of the tunnel. And in this way you develop your hole, you get it bigger and bigger. But I think the main challenge in building this particular chamber was the size of it. In the tunnels we used steel support, but because of the span in this large excavation, steel support was no longer an option. It was not strong enough. So we went to rock bolts, and that was something quite new. The access tunnel was the dimensions of it were partly set because of the size of some of the equipment that had to be brought in. But even then, there were a few squeezes. The Powerhouse crane was quite a squeeze getting that in. The scroll cases, which are the snail-shaped spiral casings at the bottom of the machine, I recall that we had to actually tip them on their side so that they came down the access tunnel on a slope, just to squeeze those in. But yes, everything had to come in and out of that access tunnel.
That is the tail race tunnel, and that's Downer and Company doing the tunnel. They did the 3 kilometres.
Water?
Oh yeah, that's water pouring in. Yeah, we had water, but we also had soft ground in there. We're obviously having problems there because you can see that they've got these supports, and we must have been going ahead in a crown excavation and then a bench. Downer had a problem in the middle of the tail race tunnel. There was a big fault in the country just underneath the Waikoko stream.
There was a lot of water in the tail race tunnel. In fact, it got to a stage where they couldn't advance the tunnel because of the amount of water coming in. And to get around that, they built a timber bulkhead up against the face of the tunnel, and then they injected grout in behind that bulkhead, attempting to drive the water away from the tunnel line. Now, they pumped grout for maybe a week or maybe even 2 weeks, a long time, and then they broke through the bulkhead, hoping that the tunnel would be nice and dry, and in fact it wasn't.
For almost 15 years, tunneling crews dug into the dark unknown, pitting their skills against the harsh environment. The geological challenges at times were enormous. The variations in the rock structure, the heat of a live volcano, and water, the perpetual flow of water, were some of what at times must have seemed to be never-ending challenges. Despite the hardships, these men worked with pride and a competitive spirit against formidable odds and brought the task to completion.
You were getting up to 25 years on this project. What were your feelings inside you looking at the project coming to fruition?
Well, I was pleased that what we'd started out to do 25 years ago, doing all the survey and investigations, I had got my life's achievement that I had investigated this scheme. I was going to damn well build it. Well, not quite come hell or high water, but that was my feeling, and it was great pleasure to see it come into fruition.
Your personal achievement of being involved in this huge project was extremely rewarding.
Yes, it was. And the fact that we had such a good team, and I don't mean only the engineers, I mean the men that worked on the job. Let's face it, without the men we'd have got nowhere, and it was often their expertise and ability to do things that counted. It was like the rest of the world. There was a dearth of power in New Zealand, and it was vital to the development of the country and to get the exports going. At the beginning of the 25 years, as you talk about, it was highly important because there were problems with getting power fast enough.
On the 18th of November, 1983, the underground power station at Rangipo was officially opened by the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Robert Muldoon. Turning the switch on the power generating turbines at Rangipo was the conclusion of the Tongariro Power Development.
The project wouldn't have been built if it hadn't been for the men, and the project is a testimony to their skills and their industry. I really have to speak of my mother and father, because it was their sacrifice which pushed me through university and subsequently getting the positions I got. And it was thanks to them, really, that I'm here today. It's really been a life of full of fulfillments and targets reached and all that sort of engineering work, because that's what's driven me on, I guess, to achieve and be in on the construction of the Tongariro Power Development, which was 25 years of our Margaret's and I's life together.
Kerry Scott was a young civil engineer when he first arrived in Turangi in 1957. From investigations engineer to project construction engineer, from its beginning to its end, the Tongariro Power Development was very much part of his life. Kerry Owen Scott was awarded the Queen's Service Medal for his services to soccer at Government House in April of 2008, a fitting tribute to a man who has been so much part of Turangi.